Looking at things that we can add to our faith. Peter gives us the instruction in 2 Peter, the verse that we're looking through, the few verses, that the next thing that he wants us to add to our faith is goodness. Adding goodness to our faith can be an exciting journey, which will enrich not just our own spiritual lives, but also the lives of others around us. While surely faith is the foundation of our belief system as a Christian, goodness is where our faith gets struck into action. So I want us to try to understand what goodness is. Goodness can be understood as the quality of being morally good. It can be virtuous, and it's also being kind. It shows itself in acts of love, in compassion, and also in service to others. You know, we don't have to look any further than Jesus himself, who was full of goodness. There's a passage in Acts chapter 10 that says that Jesus went around everywhere doing good. Whether he was feeding 5,000 on a day when they're all hungry and tired and his disciples wanted to send them away, he thought that it would be a good idea to feed them, but we don't have anything. Well, let's not worry about what we don't have. Let's do a good thing for these people. It could have been when he was on his way to another town and the crowds were pressing up against him and he feels this woman touch him, or he wasn't even sure whether it was a woman, he just felt that somebody touched him, and he stops the whole crowd and says, "Who touched me?" And they're like, "Jesus, there's all kinds of people around you." And he stops on his way, his busy traveling day, and he heals a woman who had had an issue for over 12 years. And he does a good thing. Maybe it's shown in the goodness of him when he finds out about a friend who has passed away. And he goes to the funeral and he sees the two sisters. And out of his emotion, he weeps with them. And he shows them that he cared. That was a good thing. Or what about the time that he crosses not only social barriers, but also gender barriers, and spends time with a woman at a well and talks to her and changes her life, but not only her life, but also that whole village's life. Jesus definitely went around doing good. You know, last week we talked about faith, and faith is the foundation, but faith has to express itself in actions. And what 1 Peter or 2 Peter 1 is all about is the actions that we need to show in order to prove our faith. It says, add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and so on and so forth. And this progression indicates that goodness is a vital building block in our spiritual growth. And it reinforces the idea that our faith should be active, influencing how we interact in the world that we live in. We looked at James last week, where he said that faith without deeds is dead. And this emphasizes the essential connection between our faith and our actions. Our beliefs, what we believe, what our faith, it should naturally lead us to express goodness in our actions. And when we add goodness to our faith, it is then that we demonstrate that our beliefs are alive and are active. Paul writes to the church in Galatia and talks about the relationship that we have because of the Spirit being in our lives. And he says that when you have the Spirit in their lives, there's going to be some different outpourings, and there's going to be some characteristics in your life because you have the Spirit in you. And one of those characteristics is goodness. Cultivating goodness in our lives means allowing the Holy Spirit to work in us, to transform us, to transform our hearts and our minds into living good. And this transformation empowers us to engage in acts of kindness and service, thus reflecting God's love in tangible ways to other people. Jesus explains it this way, and you'll be reminded of the song that we used to sing, or that we still sing in Sunday school, of "This Little Light of Mine." You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. It's interesting, Jesus just say, I want them to be able to say your good beliefs. I want you to be able to see the good church that you go to. I want them to be able to see all kinds. No, what he says, I want them to be able to see your good deeds and then be able to glorify God in heaven because of what you do. We need to understand, though, that goodness is not merely an abstract concept. It's a quality that has practical implications of how we live our daily lives. It involves a commitment to doing what is right, to doing what is just, to doing what is loving. Goodness, after all, reflects the nature of God, because God in himself is inherently good. And by striving to embody goodness, we align ourselves with God's character and also with his purpose. You know, throughout scriptures, there's all kinds of places that we could look at what good looks like and people that were good. If you turn over to Luke chapter 10, it's interesting that in this story and in this parable, Jesus never uses the word good. But in every sermon that we ever introduce this guy, he's known as what? The Good Samaritan. Well, why has he been dubbed this Good Samaritan? On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus in verse 25. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law required? How do you read it? And he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But wanting to justify, he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. It's not hard to understand why we've dubbed this guy the Good Samaritan. You know, when you look at what this guy did, the way he expended himself, the way that he gave himself, how he spent his own money, how I'm sure he was traveling down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And if you know the history of what that road was like, it was full of robbers all the time. And people were always in the thickets and off the sides of the road and just looking for people, vulnerable people that they could steal from. And they had found this one guy, and there are other people that traveled that road, but some of them were too religious for their own good. They were mighty Christians, or they weren't Christians, but they were mighty religious people that, you know, had figured out how to live their lives and knew the law inside and out and all the rules and regulations of what it was to follow God. But when they saw the man, they stepped around him. Didn't want to have him. I'm not going to get involved. There might be other people in the thicket. He might be a decoy. He might be, you know, we need to be careful. And another guy with the same pedigree does the same thing. And then a Samaritan. It's interesting that Jesus uses a Samaritan, the ones that the Jews despised. He said, this Samaritan took pity on this man. And he got down off of his donkey. And he attended to the guy's wounds. And he bandaged him. And he took wine and he took oil and he revived him and bathed him and took care of him. And then he put him on his own donkey, and he would have had to walk. Maybe he was using his donkey to ride, but he had to walk the rest of the way. And he gets to an inn. And he takes care of him for the night and gets up the next morning and goes on his way, leaving money with the innkeeper. And he says, I'm going to be back, and if there's any money that's owed to you, put it on my account. See, that's goodness. That's goodness in a nutshell, where he sees the needs of other people around him and takes care of them. Not so much worried about what might happen to him, but he's looking at this person. He's a good guy. Well, let's look at a good girl. Over in Acts chapter 10, or in Acts chapter 9, in verse 36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. I'll be honest with you, I'd rather have the name Tabitha than Dorcas, but anyway, we'll call her Tabitha. But listen to what was known about her. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydia was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydia, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them out, all out of the room, and then he got down on his knees and prayed. And turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. And this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Her life and her subsequent resurrection by Peter highlights how goodness can leave a lasting legacy and inspire others. She was known for just one or two simple things: that she cared for the poor, that she was giving. The Samaritan, his actions exemplify how true goodness transcends prejudice and self-interest. I've already talked about Jesus and the different things that he did of examples of goodness. But Jesus spent his life serving people, serving others, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and showing love to those who are marginalized. And his life encourages us to follow his same example of what goodness is all about. So we need to ask ourselves, how can we cultivate goodness in our life? Well, in order to add goodness to our faith, we need to take some intentional steps. It just doesn't happen. The first is this: through prayer and reflection. We need to pray that God will put in our lives the ability to act upon those that need help. That we see it. You know, we can pray for all the things that we need and want, but if we pray, God, will you put someone in my way? Will you help me to see? Can you open up my eyes to be able to see those who are in need around me? It also means that we need to reflect on the teachings of Jesus and how he applied and how they can be applied in our circumstances. We have all kinds of different places where Jesus did great and wonderful things, and we can say, well, that was really nice of him to do that. But we're supposed to imitate him and put him as the one that we can follow. So there needs to be prayer and reflection. But then also, very practically, there needs to be community involvement. We need to engage with our community in service projects, in outreach programs, or simply by being present for those in need. If we get involved in the community, isn't that when we are letting our light shine? And that people can say, well, look at the way they live their lives. They're not just about, going to church every Sunday. They're not just about knowing the Bible, but their faith is active and alive. You see, building relationships and serving together can deepen our understanding of goodness. I'm going to close with some concrete ways that we can do that and ways that we can add goodness to our lives. But we need to understand, first of all, some other things. We need to understand that goodness can have a very strong ripple effect. Listen to this. Some of the longest pay-it-forward chains have taken place at fast food restaurants like McDonald's, Tim Hortons, and Starbucks. These chains are the result of people paying for the next person's food or drink. Have you ever had that experience? When you go through and, the guy ahead of you paid for it. You ever experienced that? No? Yeah. Yeah, when you go through the drive-through. Yeah. Well, that's what pay it forward is. And it happens a lot in drive-thrus. Listen to this. In McDonald's in Wisconsin in October 22, over 23 cars in a row paid it forward for this. 23 cars. One person did it, and then the next, it took 23. Listen to this one. McDonald's drive-through or Tim Hortons in Winnipeg in 2012. Customers at Tim Hortons drive-through paid it forward for 228 orders over 3 hours. 228. There's a Starbucks in Florida that in August of 2014, a 10-hour pay it forward chain took place at a Starbucks drive-through in St. Petersburg, Florida. If you're in Florida, go to the Starbucks there and you might get your food taken care of. There was a Dairy Queen in Minnesota in December of 2020. Over 900 cars participated in a pay it forward chain at this Dairy Queen drive-through. I'm lying. I'll give it to you afterwards if you want it. These are documented.
We had a red Jeep ahead of us. I got up with the money out. The Jeep had pulled up, and I had the lady. She said, "That man, the Jeep paid."
So you had to pay it forward. So what you're supposed to do, yeah, okay, that's what pay it forward is all about.
Yeah.
It comes from a movie that happened. A kid did this in. He was in Las Vegas, and he did this as a school project, and he was trying to create this whole idea of paying it forward, and it caught on. And if you've never been a part of it, all you have to do is that when you are going through a drive-through, because the person behind you has already placed their order, just pay for it. And you might be the start of a chain, or it may happen to you. But what you want to do is, if you've had yours paid for, well, then I'll pay for the person behind me.
Niece, my friend, you've met her.
Yeah.
When she's in North Bay, she purposely looks for people who are homeless.
Yeah. Yeah. That's practical goodness. When I was driving in South Africa with one guy, he always had money in his ashtray. He didn't smoke, so might as well put something in there. But he always had money, change, to give to people that were at street corners. Thinking about how we could be good to other people. Pay it forward is a cooperative behavior where people return kindness to others. It can also be described as repaying in kind, or passing it on, or sharing kindness, or sharing the love. But pay it forward is a concrete way of showing goodness. When we act with kindness and compassion, what we do is we inspire others to do the same. This creates a culture of goodness that can transform communities. It made such a big impact that it got listed about a Tim Hortons in Winnipeg, about a Starbucks in Florida. And people, it's like we listen to the news every night, or I don't, but if you ever watch the news, it's like it's so depressing. But what do they always try to do at the very end? They bring in a good news story of somebody that's done something for their community, of somebody that's blessed somebody in some way and acted out in kindness. Acts of kindness can lead to a chain reaction where one person's good deed prompts another, and it fosters an environment of both love and support. But some of the times there's challenges to acting out on our goodness. The biggest one is, I dare say, selfishness. Our natural inclination may be to prioritize our needs over others. The way to combat this is to consciously choose to serve others. We can come up to a corner and we can come up with a lot of reasons why we should not give that person money. Well, I know where it's going. Well, why don't they just get a job? What really happened to them? And, and we can justify it and we can become selfish. I've shared before that my son, Kyle, when he walks down the street and he sees somebody helpless, he just has an affinity to them. I don't have that gene. I don't know where he got it from. I wish I had that gene. I work on that gene. I don't do as well as Sandy does. She always has change. She always has a $5 bill. She always has something to be able to give those who are in need. And she consciously thinks about, okay, I'm going to bless somebody today. But our selfishness can really get in the way. Another one is discouragement. We can look at, well, am I really going to make that big of an impact? I'm just doing this small little thing, and Satan can get in there and he can discourage us and dissuade us and say, well, it's not. God can take your little seed of goodness and blow it up into something great. And that's all it takes. I kind of shared about this already, but cynicism. We live in a world that often feels negative. And to maintain this mindset of goodness can be challenging because we can see where the world is going, and it's just like, But if we surround ourselves and think about and pray about positive influences, it can remind ourselves of the goodness that there is in humanity still. I think bigger than that, we need to understand that there's an internal perspective behind us being good. Ultimately, adding goodness to our faith is about living in accordance with God's will and reflecting His love in the world that we live in. Colossians 3:23 and 24 says, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. We need to understand that when we're serving, that when we're being good to others, we're not serving ourselves, we're not serving our church, we're serving God. We're giving Him the glory. And this reminds us that whatever we do, we should do it as if we're really working for the Lord. And that's what Paul says here. Whatever you do, do it as you're working for the Lord. And this perspective helps us to see our actions as part of a larger mission, a larger ability to be able to spread the goodness of God in a world that is hurting. So I said I'd share some practical ways of how we could add goodness to our everyday life. First, it's simple. Serve others. Volunteer your time. Volunteer your resources to help those in need. Acts of service not only uplift others, but also strengthen your own faith. It's amazing when you've gone out and you've served somebody else, what you feel inside, what you get out of it. It's not just what they get out of it, but it's also good for yourself. Another way to practically act out our goodness is by encouragement. Use your words to uplift and encourage those around you. It's amazing what a kind word can have upon another person. It may not be your words, it might be through writing. Billy walked in here this morning and I saw a couple of envelopes in her purse, and I knew what she was doing. And it's her purpose to, in her quiet way, to encourage you, to bless you, because it's the good thing to do. Another practical way of showing goodness is to practice forgiveness, to let go of grudges, to let go of resentments. This embodies the goodness of God and fosters healing in relationships. And another way is to cultivate gratitude, an attitude of gratitude, recognizing and appreciating the blessings that we have can inspire us to also share the blessings that we have with others. It's interesting, we're getting to see our gratitude jar grow in our house. And it'll be interesting at the end of the year to be able to read those times, and it's, you know, it's making me think. It's making me, okay, what am I grateful for? And it can be simple things. But gratitude changes our whole mindset, not towards just ourselves, but towards God and others around us. You see, the impact of goodness, when we actively pursue goodness, we not only grow in our faith, but we also become beacons of hope in a lost world. In a world where our communities, where we live, it's not always bleak, or it's not always bright, but it is bleak. And out of our actions, as Jesus says, if we let our light shine and if we let our good works be known, we can be a beacon of hope in a world that needs light. Adding goodness to our faith is not a one-time action, but it's a continuous journey. It requires intentionality, that we intend to do it. It requires reflection. And it also requires a willingness for us to grow. So as we strive to embody goodness, as we want to add this to our faith, we need to put our trust in God that He will take our efforts and bless us so that we can do great things for Him. Paul gave this admonition to the church in Galatia, and I'll leave you with this. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up.
Rob, when you started out your sermon this morning with Touch Me, I looked up Bill Gates, Kim 6:14. It said Matthew 14:34 to 36. When Jesus arrived in Gennesaret, the people got word out and they all gathered and he healed them all.
Yeah. Everywhere Jesus went, He did good. So, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will receive a rich reward. Amen.